This week in Idaho, an Ivermectin bill passes as Idaho supports medical freedom, and on that, Governor Little signs a revised medical freedom bill. Also, Idaho stands against DEI in favor of reclaiming merit-based education, and a Tesla dealership is targeted here in Idaho even, with violence and vandalism in Meridian. That and so much more. This is the Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Glad to have you here with us today. Hope my voice isn't too far off. I'm just coming off a little bit of a cold. It is nice. I regularly seem to miss being sick when I have to do these things. Granted, sometimes it's a little bit tight. So anywho, please bear with me. My voice sounds a little bit off, especially for you audio only listeners that are there in your car and are like, wait a second, what is going on? But in any case, I hope you're having a wonderful week, especially last week, and are enjoying a little bit of the cooler temperatures. I know here in the Treasure Valley it's gotten a little cooler, but I don't quite remember what it is up north. I need to check that weather report a little bit more regularly. But we can all celebrate. The legislative session has ended. For all you out there that have been listening to the Midweek Report and have been like, I want a break from politics, good to hear. It is, for the most part, over on the bills front. There will be no more bills being put forward and whatever else. It's just all the ones that have been signed, which, on that, highly recommend you go check out our bill breakdowns where we are writing about the ones that have passed into law and breaking them down into simple, easy to understand stuff for you. Speaking of those bills, the Idaho legislature has overwhelmingly passed Senate Bill 1211, allowing ivermectin to be sold over the counter without a prescription, something that I think a lot of Idahoans are excited about. You don't have to sneak off to DMB. The bill sailed through both chambers with strong bipartisan support, passing with 25 in favor, 9 against in the Senate, and 66 in favor and 1 against in the House. Supporters of the legislation, including Senate Pro Temp Kelly Anton, argue the bill will provide safer access to what many consider a, quote, wonder drug, end quote, that has improved billions of lives worldwide. The legislation aims to prevent citizens from resorting to veterinarian versions of medications, particularly as I noticed there with DMB, by providing proper human dose information. Despite the overwhelming support from elected representatives, as you can probably guess, pharmaceutical interests voiced opposition. Palm Eaton, the CEO of Idaho Retailers Association, representing pharmacies, claimed, quote, 99% of people, end quote, she heard from opposed the bill. This resistance follows a familiar pattern where established medical interests attempt to control access to affordable treatments. Need not go any further than just looking at some of the commercial prices for drugs and then how much they're marked up. The bill now heads to Governor Little's desk, which, as of recording, it may or may not have signed. Go check that out. You can just look up the number and the year there, where it will become law immediately upon his signature, thanks to an emergency clause. Some of the bills, it's a year out. Sometimes it's right in June. It varies. This has Idaho join Arkansas and Tennessee in allowing over-the-counter ivermectin sales, with North Carolina considering similar legislation right now. And staying with the topic of medical things, Idaho lawmakers have successfully secured medical freedom protections with Senate Bill 1210. This one was a bit of a contentious one, which was recently signed by Governor Little. This legislative victory came after an earlier setback with Senate Bill 1023, a similar bill, which faced Governor Little's veto despite passing both chambers with significant support. The new law expands Idaho's existing Coronavirus Stop Act to cover all medical interventions, not just COVID-19 vaccines. It prohibits businesses, schools, and government entities from requiring 1. Medical procedures, 2. Treatments, 3. Injections, or 5. Medications used to diagnose, prevent, or cure diseases. Under Senate Bill 1210, Idahoans cannot be denied services, employment, school attendance, or government benefits based on their medical choices. Schools cannot mandate medical intervention for students or staff, and businesses cannot impose medical requirements as conditions of employment, exempt in certain circumstances. However, with all of that said, the journey to this victory wasn't smooth, particularly when Governor Little vetoed Senate Bill 1023 on March 29th. He expressed concern about schools' ability to manage contagious illnesses, stating that the bill would, quote, jeopardize the ability of schools to send home sick students, end quote. Attorney General Rao Labrador strongly urged the legislature to override the veto, calling Senate Bill 1023 the defining bill of this session, end quote, and emphasizing the need to protect the rights of Idahoans against government overreach. Despite his efforts, though, the Senate override attempt on April 3rd failed, falling short of the two-thirds majority required to overturn the veto. Rather than admitting defeat, however, lawmakers continued drafting revised legislation. Senate Bill 1210 emerged as the successful alternative, granted there were a couple others, maintaining the core protections while addressing the governor's concerns. A crucial addition states that, quote, under no circumstances may a healthy person be excluded in a disease outbreak due to such person's vaccination status, end quote. This legislative victory represents an important step in protecting Idahoans' rights to making their own medical decisions without government interference, upholding the principles of personal liberty and parental responsibility with their children and their medical decisions there. And speaking of another victory in politics, in a landmark one for traditional American values, Idaho lawmakers have passed Senate Bill 1198, prohibiting mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion, or as we all know it, DEI, programs across public colleges and universities. The legislation, which awaits Governor Little's signature, depending on recording it may or may not have been signed, represents a step forward to restoring merit-based achievements in higher education. Quote, America has always been based on merit, explained bill sponsor Representative Judy Boyle. Everyone has equal opportunity to do the very best they can. That doesn't mean they have an equal outcome, end quote. The bill targets diverse concepts that have dominated campus culture, including critical theory, systematic oppression, and social justice ideologies that undermine individual responsibilities. By hopefully preventing these requirements, Idaho institutions can refocus on academic excellence rather than identity. Senator Ben Taze emphasized that this bill does not ban ideas, but ensures the freedom of choice. Quote, we're just simply saying that you can't require or otherwise tell students to take those specific courses, unless they've chosen to do so based on the degree they're seeking, end quote. As Representative Dale Hawkins noted, these DEI concepts, quote, have led to division, end quote, on campuses where conservative viewpoints have often been marginalized. And lastly, Senator Brandon Shippey captured the essence of this perfectly, saying, quote, it is really an issue of justice, to make sure that justice is being upheld and that we stand on merit and not just issues of partiality, end quote. Idaho now leads the way in protecting students from political indoctrination disguised as education, something that is very encouraging in the times we live in. And speaking of the culture war that is going on in America, a disturbing saga has unfolded at Meridian's Tesla dealership this last week. You may or may not have heard about it, amid Elon Musk's effort to cut waste through the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Specifically, during the March 29th protest, a 7-year-old Christopher Talbot, hopefully I'm saying your last name right, struck a Trump supporter with his vehicle after the victim exited his Trump flag-adorned truck. Despite the injuries, the counter-protesters captured Talbot's license plate, leading to his arrest for aggravated battery. The confrontation highlighted strong community support for Tesla, with just 30 anti-Tesla protesters, according to reports, vastly outnumbering the reported 200 counter-protesters in support of Trump and Elon Musk's initiatives. But that's not where the story stops. The hostilities escalated later on at night when vandals defaced 16 Cybertrucks and the dealership building with red spray paint, writing Nazi across both vehicles and structures. The FBI has joined local police in investigating the $114,000 in damages. These attacks represent the growing leftist opposition to Tesla as Elon Musk works to streamline government spending. The incident also shows the increased hostile resistance to business leaders aligned with conservative values who champion American innovation and efficiency. Hey, have you enjoyed the midweek report so far? If you have, do us a favor and hit the like and subscribe/follow button depending on the platform you're on to help us stay connected with you and reach more folks who love Idaho and keep you informed and engaged in what's going on in the state that we all love. And speaking of another legislative hot topic, Governor Little and Republican lawmakers defended our state's new immigration enforcement law Monday, despite a federal judge temporarily blocking its implementation. The bill in question is House Bill 83, which empowers local law enforcement to charge illegal immigrants with state-level crimes when they have already been detained for some other crime or some other reason, so they can't just pull them over randomly, while it also mandates cooperation with federal immigration authorities. Lawmakers defend that the law addresses federal enforcement gaps. Quote, "This focuses on criminals here illegally who have already broken other laws," end quote, said Governor Little in a statement, emphasizing collaboration with federal efforts. Senate President Pro Temp Kelly Anton, a Republican from Rupert, dismissed the profiling concerns, noting existing anti-profiling statutes and clarifying enforcement applies only after arrests for unrelated crimes. The law creates felony charges for illegal entry/re-entry and establishes a mandatory 5-year minimums for deported individuals convicted of violent crimes. The sponsors, like Representative Bruce Skog, a Republican from Nampa, expressed confidence in overcoming illegal challenges. "It is a good and fair law that will prevail through appeals," end quote. However, critics, including the ACLU, argue House Bill 83 unconstitutionally infringes on federal authority and risks racial profiling, claims that conservatives reject as unfounded. Similar laws in Texas, Ohio, and Oklahoma face parallel court battles, underscoring Republican-led states' push to assert border security roles, as the federal government has been a little lax in the past. And speaking of other states that have been a little lax, but on a different topic, the Oregon legislature is advancing 2 bills that would shield electric utilities from financial liability when their equipment causes catastrophic wildfires. I know not immediately Idaho, but we'll tie it together here. These bills mirror efforts previously attempted in Idaho after Pacific Corp failed to secure similar protections through the Idaho Utility Commission in 2024. But going back to the Oregon laws that are moving through that legislature, they would grant utilities, quote, "wildlife safety certificates," end quote, for having approved mitigation plans, and establish a wildfire fund, something that California has that hasn't gone too well, that victims could access if they agree not to sue, effectively limiting victims' ability to seek full compensation. Critics argue that this shifts costs from wealthy corporations to ordinary ratepayers. From a conservative perspective, these bills represent a troubling erosion of property rights and individual liberty, plus accountability for the utility companies if they don't take care of stuff. When utilities can secure government protection from the consequences of their action, they face less incentive to maintain infrastructure properly, because the state's going to bail them out. Idaho landowners have good reason for concern. Major stakeholders, including timber companies, insurers, and ranch owners, have already voiced opposition to similar legislation in Idaho, which is a good thing. Weyerhaeuser, which owns about 1.5 million acres in Oregon, testified that such legislation would deny their only recourse to recover losses from utility negligence. Also, we would kind of argue that if a fire happens in Oregon, it has a habit of affecting Idaho, so if there's more fires that are caused by this. But in conclusion, the legislation represents a concerning trend of government interference in free market accountability, allowing monopolistic utilities to socialize their risk while privatizing profit. We would argue that Idaho must remain vigilant against such cooperative-backed legislation that undermines the fundamental property rights and accountability for these companies. And going back to laws signed, this one we can report on, Governor Little has signed House Bill 158 into law, creating legal protections for journalists in Idaho. The unanimously passed legislation prohibits compelling journalists to disclose confidential sources or unpublished information in legal proceedings. The new law is set to take effect July 1st of 2025, so pretty quick implementation there. It specifically protects reporters from being forced to reveal 1. Unpublished information, 2. Notes, and 3. or communications obtained during news gathering. These protections extend across various media platforms, including newspapers, digital news outlets like this one, and broadcast stations. The exemption to these protections involves extreme circumstances related to national security or imminent physical harm. Press freedom advocates have argued that source confidentiality is essential for investigative reporting and maintaining the public's right to information without the fear of reporters feeling like they're going to leak what a whistleblower said. Hey there, just 1 second. If you've really enjoyed the Makery Report so far and you're going through it, please don't hesitate to share this episode so more people can hear these stories and be more informed and engaged about our beautiful state. And speaking of something that is supposed to make our state more beautiful, but we'll have to see how that pans out, the Boise City Council unanimously approved Idaho's power battery storage project at the Boise Bench substation, despite significant neighborhood opposition. The 200,000 megawatt facility, designed to power approximately 70,000 homes during peak summer hours, faced fierce resistance from nearby residents led by Mary Anderson. Quote, "We understand that it will cost more to put it elsewhere," Anderson argued. "But the cost doesn't compare to the cost of our community, our neighborhoods, our homes, and the potential of our lives if anything catastrophic happens," end quote. Residents' primary concerns centered on fire risks, with battery fires being typically only extinguished by them just burning out. It's hard for firefighters to get along with them. Plus, when that happens, there may be property devaluation when you have something like that happen nearby, because the market doesn't really care about the facts sometimes. But despite these objections, the council determined planning and zoning made no legal errors in their initial approval. Idaho Power spokesperson Eric Hackett celebrated the decision, noting that they're working with the Boise Fire Department on emergency response plans and have already reduced the project's scope based on community feedback. The construction aims to begin soon, with the completion targeted for June of 2026. So just about a year. They might do it in record time. We'll see. And in a strange and slightly surprising move, the Idaho Senate killed the State Tax Commission's budget due to concerns over the implementation cost for the recently approved school choice tax credit program. The budget, which included about $675,000 for implementing House Bill 83, particularly for the administrative side of things, which provides up to $5,000 per student and $7,500 for students with disabilities for private educational expenses. If you're curious what that all is about, go check our bill breakdown where we break down exactly what's going on with House Bill 93. Coming back to the rejection, it came after senators argued the discrepancy between the initial projected costs of about $225,800 and the final budget request of $675,000 were too great. Granted, it's only a $419,000 increase. We would argue that's not that big in the grand scheme of governments. It is more money, though. Fair enough. When House members voted on February 7th, implementation was estimated with 2 existing staff positions. By mid-March, budget writers determined the commission would need 7 additional full-time employees and new software. Senators voted against the budget, citing the cost increase from what they originally approved. The school choice program, signed into law on February 27th, marks Idaho's first educational choice program and represents a significant victory for school choice advocates and a growing move across states like Florida and others that have passed similar legislation. And speaking of things being shot down, in a narrow 17 in favor, 18 against vote, the Idaho Senate rejected House Bill 291, which would have allocated about $3 million for high-needs special education students. The decision reflects a commitment to fiscal responsibility and limited government growth, despite an unidentified about $82.2 million funding gap for special education services. As for the reasoning, Senator Tammy Nichols articulated the conservative position clearly, expressing concerns about how the bill, quote, contributes to the broader issue of government growth, end quote. She warned that such well-intentioned programs often, quote, expand year after year without results or accountability, ultimately leading to more government and more taxpayer dollars being spent with little to no return on investment, end quote. Senator Brian Lenny, for his part, reinforced this stance, noting the bill contradicted the national conservative momentum. Quote, "We're closing the Department of Education. We've got the Trump train going full steam ahead, and this bill seems like a little sidecar pumping, going the opposite direction," end quote. This pivotal moment came when Senator Ben Adams changed his vote from an aye to a nay, later explaining his preference for utilizing existing funding mechanisms rather than creating new ones. Quote, "If we want to close the gap, we should only use the funding sources we have," Adams stated, embodying the conservative principles of working with established frameworks rather than expanding government size. Speaking of another bill that's been signed by the governor, Senate Bill 1141 has been signed into law, establishing a statewide ban on unauthorized public camping and sleeping. What does that mean? It has to do with the homeless. The legislation, which passed the Idaho House with a 59 in favor, 10 against, and the Senate with 27 in favor, 8 against, aims to protect both public spaces and vulnerable populations. Despite opposition from Boise Mayor Lauren McLean, who claims the law will make it harder for homeless individuals to get back on their feet. Supporters argue the measure is necessary for public safety and community well-being. The bill's sponsor, Senator Cody Galloway, emphasized the legislation offers a compassionate approach by encouraging those experiencing homelessness to seek proper support, rather than living in dangerous outdoor conditions. The new law, effective July 1st of this year, will require cities with populations over 100,000 to enforce the camping ban, potentially redirecting resources toward proven solutions like permanent supportive housing, the church, and additional services. While critics worry about the criminalization, supporters point to the Supreme Court's recent ruling that allows cities to regulate public camping without violating constitutional protections against cruel and unusual punishment. Hey, if you've made it to this point in the Midweek Report, you probably love Idaho and the things that we talk about. So in that case, maybe consider subscribing or follow us so you don't miss our future Midweek Reports and any of our other amazing content, particularly on our Substack with our different bill breakdowns and articles to come. In stepping out of politics and going a little bit over to eastern Idaho, in Salmon, Idaho, Chris Bird, 62, and his accomplice Ick Tomlinson from Trenton orchestrated a scheme that would eventually land them in federal court. For years, allegedly, these men manipulated the bidding process for wildfire fuel truck services at the Boise and Salmon Wildlife Dispatch Centers. Through secret communications, they coordinated their bids to squeeze competitors out of the market and secure lucrative contracts from the U.S. Forest Service. The scheme was simple but effective. They shared confidential bid information, but this was meant to remain private, allowing them to undercut competitors and dominate the dispatch priority. Their deception earned their companies tens of thousands of dollars in government contracts before justice caught up with them. In 2024, both men pleaded guilty to manipulating federal charges, including wire fraud, bid rigging, and conspiracy. They are now facing potentially 20 years of prison and millions in fines. Bird and Tomlinson await their June sentencing. Their scheme to defraud taxpayer-funded wildlife protection services finally extinguished. Gotta love a good pun. And staying over there in eastern Idaho, and with a story that we have reported on, a storm of legal troubles are now brewing for Perpetua Resources, the company planning to extract over $6 billion in precious metals from the historic Stibnite site. Faces a class action lawsuit on March 21st in the U.S. District Court. The lawsuit alleges Perpetua deliberately misled investors about development costs for their ambitious gold mine project. According to the complaint, CEO John Cherry and CFO Jessica Largent, hopefully that last name was gotten right, and the company engaged in, quote, a scheme to deceive the market, end quote, that artificially inflated stock prices. On February 13th, Perpetua revealed the project's cost had increased from $1.3 billion to over $2.2 billion, a 75% increase. This revelation sent stock plummeting about 22% the following day. The lawsuit complains Perpetua had previously downplayed these increases, suggesting merely a 10% to 20% increase. While Perpetua spokesperson Martin Bowett stated the company, quote, intends to vigorously defend itself, end quote. And then going from eastern Idaho to up north to the other populated area of the state, at the Kootenai Republican Central Committee meeting, or KCRCC, it's almost better to say the name meeting, 2 Precinct Committeemen were removed from their seats. Kathleen Tillman, representing Precinct 417, lost her position due to repeated absence, while Kelly Palm from Precinct 314 was expelled following a heated outburst. The meeting, initially focusing on procedural matters, like most of these central committees are, took an unexpected turn when Palm objected to Tillman's removal, citing a family death as the justification for her absence. The situation escalated when Palmer allegedly made shocking accusations against other committeemen, insinuating foul play in his wife's recent death. The committee swiftly moved into executive session, resulting in Palmer's expulsion under Robert's Rules of Order. Both precincts 314 and 417 are now vacant, with the KCRCC bylaws governing the process for filling these positions. And coming to our last story here, in a coordinated effort to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, the Shoshone-Bannock tribe successfully relocated approximately 120 elk across Interstate 15 on Sunday morning. After months of increased accidents, roughly 50 elk hit since January, tribal officials partnered with state agencies to move the herd to a safer habitat. The operation temporarily closing I-15 between exits 80 and 89, with helicopters guiding the animals safely across the highway, while traffic was diverted to Highway 91. Quote, "This decision was not made lightly," said Chairman Lee Jan Tendoy, acknowledging the delicate balance between wildlife protection and public safety. Quote, "This is the last underdeveloped winter range in this area," end quote. The 8 a.m. operation involved multiple agencies, including Tribal Fish and Game, Idaho Transportation Department, State Police, and Tribal Emergency Management, demonstrating successful cooperation between tribal and state authorities. And speaking of successful, we have successfully made it through the midweek report. It's time for us to wrap up. Thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you like the midweek report, make sure to check out our other content on our Substack or Twitter, where we're always running new stuff and trying to improve, specifically after the legislative session. We're going to have some fun stuff. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting us at @LocalYokelIdaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.